My name is Maddie, and I'm 54 years old. As I sit here in my small kitchen looking out at the garden I've tended for 25 years, I can't help but reflect on the hardest decision I've ever had to make. It involved my only son, a choice between my future and his demands, and a moment when I had to choose myself for the very first time. What I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about family sacrifice and what it truly means to love someone. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Have you ever faced an impossible choice with someone you love? If this story sounds familiar, or if you're curious about how I handled my son's shocking ultimatum, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real life stories. Trust me, what happened next will surprise you. I've always been a practical woman. Working at Henderson Accounting in downtown Kansas City, Missouri for 22 years taught me the value of every single dollar. My small office overlooked the bustling street below, where I watched the same rhythm of life play out day after day. Cars rushing past people, hurrying to appointments, everyone chasing their own version of the American dream. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every morning at 6:30, I'd brew my coffee in the same blue ceramic mug I'd owned since my divorce in 2010. That divorce left me with a mortgage, a teenage son named Jake, and a determination to never depend on anyone else again. Jake was 15 then, angry about the split, but we managed to build something good together in our little two-story house on Maple Street. The house wasn't much to look at from the outside. Paint peeling around the window frames, a front porch that creaked when you stepped on the third board, and a driveway cracked down the middle. But inside, I'd made it warm. Hand-me-down furniture refinished with care curtains I'd sewn myself, and photographs of Jake and me scattered throughout every room. Each picture told a story of baseball games, birthday parties, and quiet Sunday mornings when it was just us against the world. Those early years after the divorce were tight. I learned to shop at thrift stores, clip coupons with religious dedication, and stretch every grocery dollar until it screamed. Jake wore hand-me-downs without complaining, and we made Friday night pizza from scratch because it was cheaper than ordering delivery. We'd sit on our worn couch sharing stories about our week-planning weekend projects around the house. But I had a plan. Every paycheck I put away whatever I could spare. $10 here, 20 there, sometimes 50 if I'd managed to fix something myself instead of calling a repairman. Over the years, those small amounts grew into something substantial. $180,000 sitting in my savings account, like a promise to my future self. My dream was simple but precious to me. At 58, I wanted to retire early and open a small flower shop. I'd already scouted locations, researched business licenses, and even designed the layout in my head. White wooden shelves lined with mason jars, fresh blooms arranged by color, and a small seating area where customers could watch me work. I could practically smell the roses and baby's breath that would fill my days. Jake had been such a bright kid, full of curiosity and quick with a smile that could melt any frustration I felt. He'd been accepted to Missouri State with a partial scholarship, and I was so proud watching him pack for college. We both cried that August morning when I dropped him off at his dorm, but they were happy tears mixed with hope for his future. Then everything changed during his sophomore year. The phone calls became less frequent. His grades slipped, and eventually he just stopped going to classes altogether. When he came home that following spring, he wasn't the same young man who'd left. Something had shifted in his eyes, a restlessness that worried me, but that I couldn't quite define. Jake bounced from job to job after that. Construction work, retail, food service, delivery, driving. Nothing seemed to stick, and our conversations became increasingly strained. He'd ask for money to tide him over between jobs, always promising to pay me back, always having another opportunity just around the corner that never quite materialized. Still, he was my son. When he called asking for help with rent or car repairs, I found ways to stretch my budget a little further. I told myself it was temporary, that he just needed time to find his footing. But deep down, I started to worry that I was enabling something unhealthy, rather than helping him grow. Our relationship had become transactional in a way that broke my heart. Weeks would pass without hearing from him, then suddenly my phone would ring with another request for assistance. Each conversation followed the same pattern, small talk catching up, then the real reason for the call. I missed the son who used to call just to tell me about a funny thing that happened at work or to ask for my banana bread recipe. My coworkers at Henderson often asked about Jake, and I found myself making excuses for his absence from family gatherings and holidays. He's working I'd say, or you know how busy young people are these days. The truth was becoming harder to admit, even to myself. Nah. The call came on a Saturday evening in late October. I was curled up on my couch with a mystery novel and a cup of tea, enjoying the peaceful quiet of my weekend routine. When my phone buzzed with Jake's name, I felt the familiar mixture of hope and dread that had become my default response to his contact. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice carried a seriousness I hadn't heard before, formal and distant. "Can I come over tonight? It's important." Within an hour, Jake stood on my front porch, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a young woman who looked barely out of high school with long brown hair and nervous eyes that darted everywhere except directly at me. Her small frame was bundled in an oversized jacket, and even in the dim porch light, I could see the telltale curve of early pregnancy beneath her clothes. "Mom, this is Destiny," Jake said, his arm protectively around her shoulders. "She's carrying my baby." My heart did something complicated in my chest. Part joy at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. Part shock at this sudden development, and part worry about the serious expressions on both their faces. I invited them inside, offering tea and cookies, trying to process this life-changing news while maintaining some semblance of normalcy. Destiny settled carefully into my armchair, one hand resting unconsciously on her stomach. She was beautiful in that fresh-faced way of very young women, but there was something fragile about her that made me want to wrap her in a warm blanket. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and hesitant. "I'm sorry to just show up like this, Mrs. Henderson," she said, and I could hear a slight southern accent in her words. "Jake said you'd want to know about the baby." As we talked, pieces of their story emerged. Destiny was 21, originally from Arkansas, with no family support and nowhere else to go. She'd been staying with Jake in his small apartment, but the morning sickness had been severe, leaving her weak and unable to work her waitressing job. Jake explained that his new construction job required long hours and frequent travel to different sites around the state. "That's actually why we're here," Jake said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. "Destiny needs proper care during her pregnancy, and I can't be there to provide it. This job is our best chance at making real money before the baby comes." I nodded, assuming he was leading up to asking for advice about prenatal care or maybe help finding a good doctor. I was already mentally calculating how I might assist with medical bills or baby supplies. What came next blindsided me completely. "I need you to quit your job and take care of her," Jake said flatly. "She can stay here during the week while I'm working, and you can make sure she eats right, gets to her appointments, doesn't overdo things. It's what family does for each other." The room fell silent except for the tick of my grandmother's clock on the mantel. I stared at my son, certain I'd misunderstood something fundamental about what he'd just said. "Quit my job. Give up the career I'd built over more than 2 decades. Jake, honey, I think there might be some other options we should consider first." I began carefully. "There are pregnancy support groups, daycare programs, community health services." "No, Mom," his interruption was sharp, final. "This is family. This is your grandchild we're talking about. Destiny doesn't need some stranger taking care of her. She needs you." I looked at Destiny, hoping to see some indication that this wasn't her idea, that maybe Jake was overstepping. But she sat quietly, her eyes downcast, occasionally pressing her hand to her mouth as if fighting nausea. She seemed very young and very scared, and I felt a maternal tug toward this girl who was barely older than Jake had been when I divorced his father. "What about the financial aspect?" I asked, trying to approach this logically. "I can't just stop working without some way to replace that income. I have a mortgage, utilities, insurance." Jake leaned forward, and for the first time that evening, I saw a flash of the confident smile that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. "Actually, I've been thinking about that too. If you can't take care of Destiny personally, then we'll need to hire professional help. A live-in caregiver, someone with medical training who can be here around the clock." He pulled out his phone and showed me notes he'd apparently made about the costs involved. "I figure it'll run about $50,000 to cover everything. The caregiver, special food, extra medical appointments, supplies for the baby. I know you've been saving up for your retirement, and this would be the perfect way to invest in your family's future instead." The number hit me like cold water. $50,000. More than a quarter of everything I'd managed to save over the past 14 years. Money that represented countless small sacrifices, weekend shifts, and careful budgeting. Money that was supposed to secure my own future. "Jake, that's a lot to ask," I said weakly. "It's not asking, Mom. It's family obligation." His voice carried an edge I didn't recognize. Destiny doesn't have anyone else. Her parents kicked her out when they found out about the pregnancy. I'm the only stability she has, and you're the only person I can trust to help us through this. As the evening wore on, I felt increasingly cornered. Every practical objection I raised was met with emotional manipulation that left me feeling selfish and uncaring. When I mentioned my own retirement plans, Jake accused me of caring more about flowers than about my future grandchild. When I suggested they look into assistance programs, he painted a picture of bureaucratic indifference and dangerous delays in care. Destiny remained largely silent throughout our discussion, occasionally nodding when Jake spoke about her condition or needs. The few times she did speak, it was to apologize for the imposition or to express gratitude for my even considering their request. Her sweet, soft-spoken manner made it even harder to contemplate refusing them. By the time they left that evening, I felt exhausted and confused. Jake had given me 3 days to decide, saying he needed to know soon so he could arrange alternative care if necessary. As I watched their taillights disappear down my street, I realized I had no idea how to process what had just happened to my quiet, predictable life. The next few days brought an escalation of pressure I hadn't anticipated. Jake called multiple times daily, each conversation more intense than the last. What had started as a request between family members began to feel like a campaign designed to wear down my resistance through sheer persistence and emotional manipulation. On Monday morning, Jake arrived with 2 of his friends, Kyle and Brandon, both young men in their 20s who seemed to have strong opinions about family responsibilities and generational obligations. They settled into my living room as if planning a military operation, spreading out papers and making lists, while discussing my situation as if I weren't sitting right there with them. "The thing is, Mrs. Henderson," Kyle explained, "back in the day this wouldn't even be a question. Grandmothers always helped with the babies. It's like natural law or something." Brandon nodded enthusiastically. "My grandma raised half the kids in our neighborhood. She always said it was the best time of her life, way better than whatever job she had before." Jake seized on their support, launching into a detailed breakdown of exactly how the $50,000 would be spent. He'd researched nanny services, calculated grocery budgets for specialized prenatal nutrition, and even priced out baby equipment that wouldn't be needed for months. The precision of his planning was both impressive and alarming. "Look, I've got it all figured out," he said, spreading papers across my coffee table. $25,000 for a qualified caregiver for 18 months. $15,000 for medical expenses that insurance won't cover. $5,000 for special dietary needs and supplements. The remaining $5,000 for emergency costs and baby supplies. The numbers felt surreal, like we were discussing someone else's life and money. I found myself wondering when my son had become so calculating, so comfortable with demanding such enormous sacrifices from others. This wasn't the thoughtful young man I'd raised, the one who used to worry about asking for $5 for school lunch money. As the day progressed, Jake's patience seemed to evaporate entirely. When I attempted to discuss compromise solutions or alternative arrangements, he became increasingly agitated and dismissive. Every practical concern I raised was met with accusations of selfishness or lack of family loyalty. "You know what, Mom, I'm starting to see who you really are," he said during one particularly heated exchange. "All these years, I thought you were this caring, supportive mother. But when I really need you, when your own grandchild needs you, you're more concerned about your precious savings account and your little flower shop fantasy." The words stung because they contained just enough truth to make me question myself. Was I being selfish? Was I prioritizing my own dreams over my family's genuine needs? But something deeper inside me rebelled against the manipulation I could feel happening, even if I couldn't fully articulate what it was. Destiny's conditions seemed to worsen during this period, whether from stress or the natural progression of her pregnancy. She spent most of her time in my guest room, emerging only for meals and bathroom breaks. The sight of her pale face and obvious discomfort added another layer of pressure to an already overwhelming situation. "She needs help now," Jake insisted after Destiny had spent an afternoon vomiting. "We can't wait for you to figure out the perfect solution. Either you step up and do what grandmothers are supposed to do, or you write the check so I can get her proper care somewhere else." I began researching frantically, trying to find information that might support or challenge Jake's claims about costs and necessary care. What I found online only confused me more. Pregnancy care recommendations varied wildly, Costs seemed negotiable, and most sources emphasized the importance of routine medical supervision rather than intensive personal caregiving. When I tried to share this information with Jake, he dismissed it impatiently. Internet research isn't the same as real-world experience, Mom. I've talked to people who've been through this. I know what Destiny needs. The presence of Kyle and Brandon throughout these discussions created an atmosphere that felt increasingly hostile to any dissent. When I expressed concerns about my own financial security, they exchanged looks that seemed to communicate their shared opinion of my priorities. Their youth and certainty made me feel old and out of touch, as if my decades of life experience were irrelevant to this modern family crisis. By Tuesday evening, Jake had introduced a timeline element that felt designed to prevent careful consideration of alternatives. He'd been offered a promotion at his construction job, but only if he could commit to being available for travel starting the following Monday. The opportunity was supposedly too good to pass up, but it required immediate resolution of the Destiny situation. "This could change everything for us," he explained urgently, "but I need to know you're going to be here for her, or I need time to arrange something else. I can't leave her alone when she's this sick." The emotional weight of seeing Destiny struggle, combined with Jake's increasingly aggressive demands and the pressure from his friends, left me feeling isolated and confused about my own judgment. I began calling in sick to work, unable to concentrate on spreadsheets and client meetings, while my home life felt like it was spinning out of control. On Wednesday afternoon, everything came to a head when Jake presented me with what he called his final offer. If I couldn't personally care for Destiny, he would accept $40,000 instead of $50,000, but the money had to be transferred by Friday so he could make arrangements before starting his new position. "I'm trying to be reasonable here, Mom," he said, his voice carrying a threat underneath the words. "But Destiny can't wait much longer, and I can't turn down this job opportunity. You need to decide if you're going to be part of our family's future or if you're going to abandon us when we need you most."
Nah.
Everything changed Thursday afternoon when I offered to take Destiny grocery shopping while Jake was at work. I thought some fresh air might help her feel better, and I wanted a chance to talk with her privately about her pregnancy and needs. What I discovered during that simple trip to the supermarket shattered everything I thought I understood about the situation. We were standing in the produce section when Destiny suddenly started crying. Not the gentle tears of pregnancy hormones, but deep gut-wrenching sobs that attracted concerned looks from other shoppers. I guided her to a quiet corner near the pharmacy and waited for the storm to pass, offering tissues and gentle reassurance. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking with each word. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Henderson. I'm so sorry." What came next hit me like a physical blow. Through her tears, Destiny confessed that Jake wasn't the father of her baby. They'd only been dating for 2 months, having met at a bar where she was working as a waitress. The real father was her ex-boyfriend Marcus, who had fled to Chicago when she told him about the pregnancy, leaving her with no support and nowhere to turn. "Jake said he could help me if I just did this one thing," she sobbed. "He said you had money saved up and that you'd want to help once you understood the situation. He promised he'd take care of me and the baby if I could just convince you to give him what he needed to get us started." The manipulation had been orchestrated from the beginning. Jake had coached Destiny on how to appear more sick than she actually was, what symptoms to emphasize, and how to appeal to my maternal instincts. He'd researched the costs of newborn care not because he planned to use the money for Destiny's needs, but because he wanted to present a convincing argument for why he needed such a large sum. As Destiny continued her confession, more details emerged that made me feel physically ill. Jake had convinced her that scamming his mother was justified because older people had more money than they knew what to do with, and because I would eventually be happy to have a grandchild, regardless of the circumstances. He'd presented the plan as a win-win situation where everyone would end up better off. "I was desperate," Destiny explained, her voice barely audible. "My family disowned me when they found out I was pregnant. I was living in my car when I met Jake. When he offered to help, I didn't ask too many questions about the details. I just knew I needed somewhere safe to stay and someone to care about what happened to me and my baby." The drive home was silent except for Destiny's occasional sniffles and whispered apologies. My mind was reeling, trying to process not just the deception, but what it revealed about my son's character. The young man I'd raised, worried about, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally, had become someone capable of elaborate emotional manipulation designed to defraud his own mother. When we arrived back at my house, Jake was waiting in the driveway, his face dark with anger. He'd apparently come home early and found us gone, which had triggered some kind of panic about his carefully constructed plan falling apart. Before I could even get out of the car, he was at my window demanding to know where we'd been and why Destiny looked upset. "We need to talk," I said quietly, trying to maintain calm while my heart hammered in my chest. All three of us, right now. Inside the house, I confronted Jake with what Destiny had told me. I expected denials, explanations, maybe even genuine remorse for a plan that had gotten out of hand. What I didn't expect was the cold rage that transformed my son into someone I barely recognized. "You manipulated a pregnant woman into lying to me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You've been lying to me for weeks about everything. The baby isn't yours, the relationship isn't what you claimed, and you don't need money for care or medical expenses. You just wanted my savings." Jake's response was swift and vicious. Rather than deny the accusations, he attacked my right to question his methods or motives. According to him, I owed him this money anyway as compensation for the difficult childhood he'd endured after my divorce from his father. My refusal to immediately hand over my life savings proved that I'd never really loved him the way a proper mother should. "You ruined my life when you divorced Dad," he snarled, his face flushed with anger. "You made everything harder for me, made me grow up in a broken home while you played the victim. This money is the least you can do to make up for all of that." The cruelty in his voice was shocking, but it was also illuminating. This wasn't a desperate young man making poor choices under pressure. This was someone who felt fundamentally entitled to whatever he wanted from me, regardless of the cost to my own well-being or future security. Years of gradually increasing requests for money hadn't been temporary help during difficult times. They'd been preparation for this moment, this ultimate demand for everything I'd worked to build. Destiny, huddled in the corner of my living room, crying quietly as Jake and I faced off in the center of everything I'd built for myself. She kept apologizing to him for revealing the truth and to me for participating in the deception. But Jake showed no concern for her distress. Now that his plan was exposed, she'd become a liability rather than an asset. "Fine," he said finally, his voice dropping to something cold and threatening. "If you want to be selfish, if you want to choose money over family, then live with that choice. But don't expect to be part of our lives after this. Don't expect to ever meet your grandchild or to have any relationship with me going forward. You'll have your precious savings and you'll be completely alone." The threat hung in the air like smoke designed to terrify me into compliance, and for a moment it almost worked. The prospect of losing my son forever, of never knowing my potential grandchild, felt overwhelming enough to make me consider surrendering everything just to avoid that loss. But then I looked at Destiny, still crying in my chair, still being used as a pawn in Jake's manipulation. I thought about the elaborate deception, the calculated emotional abuse, and the complete disregard for my own needs and future. Most importantly, I recognized that giving Jake what he wanted wouldn't actually solve anything. It would only teach him that manipulation and threats were effective tools for getting what he wanted from people who loved him. I spent Thursday night staring at my ceiling, processing everything I'd learned and trying to figure out how to move forward. The young woman sleeping in my guest room was pregnant alone and being used by someone who claimed to care about her. My son had revealed himself to be someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of elaborate cruelty toward the people who loved him most. And I had to decide how much of myself I was willing to sacrifice to enable his behavior. By dawn, my decision was clear. I would not be giving Jake any money, and I would not be quitting my job to provide care that wasn't actually needed. More importantly, I would not allow myself to be manipulated by threats or emotional blackmail, even when those threats came from my own child. Friday morning, I called Jake and asked him to come over for a final conversation. When he arrived, he brought Kyle and Brandon again, apparently assuming that group pressure would be more effective than individual persuasion. I let them settle into my living room, then stood in front of them with a calmness that surprised even me. "I'm not going to give you any money," I said simply. "I'm not going to quit my job, and I'm not going to be manipulated or threatened into changing my mind about either of those things." The explosion that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Jake began screaming accusations and insults, his face red with rage, while Kyle and Brandon added their own commentary about ungrateful parents and broken family values. The noise was overwhelming, but underneath it all, I felt a strange sense of peace about my decision. Jake's anger quickly escalated beyond verbal abuse. He began throwing things, slamming my furniture and punching the wall hard enough to leave holes in the drywall. When he picked up one of my grandmother's ceramic figurines and hurled it against the fireplace, watching it shatter into dozens of pieces, I knew I had crossed into genuinely dangerous territory. I walked calmly to my phone and dialed 911, speaking clearly, while Jake continued his rampage in the background. I need police assistance at my home. My adult son is destroying my property, and I'm concerned for my safety. The arrival of 2 police officers brought immediate quiet to my living room. Jake and his friends suddenly seemed much younger and less intimidating when faced with actual authority figures who weren't impressed by their arguments about family obligations and generational responsibility. The officers separated us, took statements, and issued Jake a warning about property destruction and disturbing the peace. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" Officer Martinez asked privately. "We can arrest him right now if you feel unsafe." I looked at my son, still furious but now silent, and felt a complicated mixture of love and disappointment that threatened to overwhelm me. "Not today," I said quietly, "but I want this documented in case there are future incidents." After the police left, Destiny emerged from the guest room where she'd hidden during Jake's outburst. Her small suitcase was packed, and her face was pale with fear. She'd witnessed Jake's capacity for violence, and it had apparently clarified some things about her own situation. "I can't stay here anymore," she said quietly. "This isn't safe for me or the baby." I spent the next several hours helping Destiny connect with local resources I'd researched during my own frantic internet sessions earlier in the week. We found a shelter that specialized in helping pregnant women, a clinic that provided prenatal care regardless of insurance status and contact information for several support programs designed specifically for young mothers in crisis. Jake made one final attempt to change my mind before leaving that afternoon. Without Kyle and Brandon to back him up, his approach was different, alternating between desperate pleading and cold manipulation. He promised to pay me back with interest, swore he'd learned his lesson about honesty and respect, and painted vivid pictures of the lonely future I was choosing by rejecting his request for help. When none of that worked, he returned to threats. I would never see him again, never know my grandchildren, never be welcomed back into his life, no matter how much I regretted this decision. Other family members would learn about my selfishness and would judge me accordingly. I would die alone and unloved because I'd chosen money over family when it mattered most. "That might be true," I replied calmly, "but I'd rather be alone and honest than together and manipulated. If loving you means bankrupting myself for your schemes, then maybe we need to reconsider what love actually means." As Jake's car disappeared down my street for what I knew might be the last time I felt grief and relief in equal measure. I'd lost my son, but I'd found something equally valuable: respect for myself and confidence in my own judgment. The scared, confused woman who'd been considering quitting her job and emptying her savings account had been replaced by someone who understood the difference between helping and enabling, between love and manipulation. That evening, I changed my phone number and blocked Jake on all social media platforms. I also contacted my bank to add additional security measures to my accounts and scheduled a consultation with a lawyer about protecting myself from potential future harassment or financial abuse. The hardest part was calling my sister Margaret and my best friend Linda to explain what had happened. I'd been too ashamed to share the full story while it was unfolding, but now I needed their support to process the emotional aftermath of cutting ties with my own child. Both women were shocked by Jake's behavior, but supportive of my decision to protect myself. "Honey, you raised him to be better than this," Linda said during our long phone conversation that night. "Whatever went wrong, it's not because you didn't love him enough or sacrifice enough. Sometimes people make choices that break our hearts, but that doesn't mean we have to let them break our lives too." The weeks and months that followed were a period of intentional reconstruction. I'd spent so much energy on Jake's drama that I'd neglected my own needs and goals, but now I had the space and emotional bandwidth to focus on building the future I actually wanted rather than the one being demanded of me. My first priority was career advancement. I'd been coasting at Henderson Accounting for too long, comfortable but not challenged, secure but not growing. With the distraction of Jake's constant requests for help removed from my life, I could see opportunities I'd previously overlooked. When Thompson Associates, a larger firm across town, posted an opening for a senior accountant position, I applied immediately. The interview process was rigorous, but I felt confident in a way I hadn't experienced in years. My skills were sharp, my references were strong, and most importantly, I could focus entirely on presenting myself as a professional rather than as someone perpetually distracted by family crises. When they offered me the position with a 15% salary increase, I accepted without hesitation. The new job came with better benefits, more interesting clients, and colleagues who appreciated my experience and work ethic. For the first time in years, I looked forward to Monday mornings instead of dreading the weekly grind. My supervisor, Patricia Williams, was a woman about my age who'd built her own successful career while navigating similar family challenges. "You have great instincts," she told me during my 3-month review. "I can tell you're someone who doesn't let personal drama interfere with professional excellence. That's rarer than you might think." With my increased income and reduced family-related expenses, I was able to accelerate my retirement savings significantly. I met with a financial advisor who helped me restructure my investments for better growth potential and opened additional retirement accounts that would provide more flexibility for early withdrawal if I decided to pursue my flower shop dream sooner than originally planned. But the real transformation was happening in my personal life. Without the constant stress of Jake's demands and manipulations, I had energy for activities and relationships I'd neglected for years. I joined a book club at the local library, enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the community college, and started volunteering with a literacy program that helped adults improve their reading skills. The most surprising development was my friendship with Gary Morrison, a widower I met at book club who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. Gary was 57, retired from teaching high school mathematics and learning to rebuild his life around interests he'd set aside during his wife's long illness. Our friendship developed slowly, built on shared interests and mutual respect rather than loneliness or desperation. "I never thought I'd want to date again," I confided to Linda over coffee one Saturday morning. "But Gary makes me remember what it feels like to enjoy someone's company without worrying about their ulterior motives." Gary had adult children who lived in other states, and he'd learned firsthand about the importance of boundaries in family relationships. His experience with his own manipulative brother, who'd tried to pressure him into questionable financial decisions during his grieving period, gave him unique insight into my situation with Jake. "Family members who use your love against you aren't actually loving you back," he observed during one of our long walks around the neighborhood. "Real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your security or self-respect. It finds ways to support without destroying." My house became a reflection of my new priorities and peace of mind. I used some of my savings to update the kitchen with new appliances, and countertops replaced the worn carpeting in the living room with hardwood floors, and transformed my backyard into a showcase garden that neighbors stopped to admire during their evening walks. The guest room where Destiny had stayed was converted into a home office where I could work on my business plan for the flower shop and pursue online courses in small business management. The space felt light and positive, filled with books about entrepreneurship and gardening magazines that fed my dreams for the future. I also invested in my health and wellness in ways I'd neglected for years. Regular checkups with my doctor revealed that the stress I'd been carrying had affected my blood pressure and sleep patterns, both of which improved dramatically once Jake was no longer a constant source of anxiety in my life. I started taking yoga classes, hired a personal trainer for twice-weekly sessions, and prioritized nutritious meals and adequate sleep. The financial impact of my decisions was remarkable. Without the periodic drain of Jake's requests for help, my savings grew steadily. The combination of my salary increase, reduced stress-related spending, and better investment strategies meant I was actually ahead of my original retirement schedule by several months. More importantly, I was building a life based on my own values and goals rather than constantly reacting to other people's demands and crises. The flower shop dream felt more attainable every month, and I'd identified a perfect location in a strip mall near several retirement communities where older residents might appreciate both the convenience and the personal service. 6 months after that final confrontation with Jake, I was sitting in the same kitchen where this story began, but everything had changed. The morning light streamed through new windows I'd installed as part of my home improvements, illuminating a space that felt peaceful and entirely my own. My coffee tasted better. My back hurt less, and my future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I'd chosen rather than obligations imposed by others. The promotion at Thompson Associates had exceeded all my expectations. I was now managing accounts for several major clients, earning more than I'd ever imagined possible and being considered for a partnership track that could provide substantial financial benefits if I chose to work a few additional years. The respect of my colleagues and the satisfaction of challenging work reminded me daily that I had value beyond my usefulness to other people's schemes. Gary and I had developed a relationship that surprised us both with its depth and compatibility. Neither of us was interested in remarrying or combining households, but we'd found joy in shared adventures like weekend trips to Kansas City's art museums, cooking elaborate meals together, and planning a vacation to Colorado where we could explore mountain trails and small town gardens. "You're different than when I first met you," he told me during a quiet dinner at my house last week. "More relaxed, more confident. It's like you've finally given yourself permission to take up space in your own life." His observation was accurate. For too many years, I'd made myself small to accommodate other people's needs and demands. I had apologized for having savings, felt guilty about pursuing my dreams, and constantly second-guessed my right to make decisions about my own future. Living without that burden felt like emerging from a fog I hadn't even realized was there. The flower shop project had advanced from fantasy to concrete planning. I'd completed a small business course, identified suppliers, and begun networking with local wedding planners and event coordinators who might become future customers. The location I'd found was perfect, good parking, reasonable rent, and surrounded by the kind of businesses that attracted my target demographic. Most surprisingly, I'd heard indirectly that Jake and Destiny had separated shortly after leaving my house that final day. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Destiny had successfully connected with support services and was doing well in a program for young mothers. She'd also been able to establish contact with Marcus, the baby's father, who had returned from Chicago and was now involved in planning for the child's future. Jake, according to these same sources, had struggled to maintain the construction job that had supposedly required his immediate commitment. Without the financial windfall he'd expected from manipulating me, he'd been unable to sustain the lifestyle he'd been planning. I felt sadness about his difficulties, but no guilt about my refusal to enable his schemes. There had been 2 attempts at contact from Jake during these months, both of which I'd declined to engage with. The first was a text message that alternated between apologies and renewed demands for money sent from a number I didn't recognize. The second was a message passed through my sister Margaret, who reported that Jake claimed to have learned from his mistakes and wanted to repair our relationship. "What did you tell him?" I asked Margaret during our weekly phone call. "I told him that if he was truly sorry, he needed to prove it through actions rather than words," she replied. "And that demanding contact with you wasn't the same as earning it back." He didn't like that answer very much. The decision to maintain no contact had been difficult, but ultimately liberating. I'd spent too many years allowing Jake to drain my emotional and financial resources through cycles of crisis and temporary reconciliation. Breaking that pattern required accepting that he might never become the person I'd hoped he would be, and that his choices were not my responsibility to fix or finance. My new life was built around people who added value rather than extracting it. The book club had introduced me to several women who'd become genuine friends. My volunteer work with the literacy program connected me to a community of people committed to helping others improve their lives through their own efforts. Even my relationships with coworkers had deepened now that I wasn't constantly distracted by family drama. The health improvements were as dramatic as the financial ones. My blood pressure was normal for the first time in years. I'd lost 12 pounds without trying, and my energy levels were consistently high. The chronic tension headaches that had plagued me during the period of Jake's escalating demands had disappeared entirely. As I finish telling you this story, I want to be clear about something important. I don't believe that cutting contact with family members is always the right answer to difficult relationships. Every situation is different, and every person has to make decisions based on their own circumstances and values. What I do believe is that love shouldn't require you to sacrifice your financial security, mental health, or self-respect. Real family relationships are built on mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. When someone uses your love for them as a weapon to extract compliance with their demands, they're not actually loving you back. The hardest lesson I learned through all of this was that saying no to manipulation isn't selfish. It's actually one of the most loving things you can do both for yourself and for the person trying to manipulate you. By refusing to enable Jake's behavior, I forced him to face the consequences of his choices, rather than shielding him from reality at my own expense. I also learned that it's never too late to reclaim your own life, even when you've spent years accommodating other people's needs at the expense of your own. The dreams I thought I'd have to abandon to satisfy Jake's demands are now closer to reality than they've ever been. My flower shop will open next spring just after my 55th birthday. The business plan is solid, the financing is in place, and I have the energy and excitement to make it succeed. More importantly, it will be mine built with money I earned and saved through my own efforts in service of a vision that brings me joy rather than obligation. Tomorrow, Gary and I are driving to Lawrence to visit a botanical garden that's supposed to have one of the most beautiful rose collections in the Midwest. It's the kind of spontaneous adventure I couldn't have imagined 6 months ago when every decision had to be filtered through worry about Jake's next crisis or demand for assistance. Tonight, I'll sleep peacefully in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by choices I've made for myself, rather than concessions I've offered to keep the peace with people who didn't actually want peace. And when I wake up, I'll have another day to invest in the future I'm building, rather than the drama I'm trying to escape. That feeling of ownership over my own life might be the most valuable thing I've gained from this entire experience. It's worth more than the money I saved, more than the stress I avoided, and definitely more than the relationship I lost with someone who'd forgotten how to love me without trying to control me. Have you ever had to choose between enabling someone you love and protecting your own future? Have you found yourself questioning whether setting boundaries makes you selfish or whether saying no makes you a bad person? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below because I know I'm not the only one who struggled with these impossible choices. If this story resonated with you, if you've been in similar situations with family members who use love as manipulation, please hit that like button and share this video with others who might need to hear that it's okay to choose yourself sometimes. Subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. And remember, taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't love others well if you don't respect yourself enough to maintain healthy boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story, and thank you for supporting each other in the comments. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that behavior comes from people we care about deeply. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and don't be afraid to choose your own happiness over other people's manipulations.